March 15, 2024. Venice Beach. Marcus Sullivan had been invisible for 20 years. The man who once bench-pressed 500 pounds now swept floors at 5 a.m., hoping nobody would look twice. Then Rico walked in with his crew, 19 years old, full of rage, looking for someone to hurt. He picked the old man in the corner, the janitor with the gray beard who looked like an easy target. Rico had no idea he was staring at his father. Marcus had spent 2 decades running from this moment. From the needle marks, from the headlines, from the son whose mother took him away when the world learned what Marcus had become. Now that son stood 3 feet away, fists clenched, demanding respect he didn't know he'd inherited. The next 60 seconds would change everything Rico thought he knew about strength, about family, about the man who gave him everything except his name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The weight of the mop in Marcus's calloused hands felt heavier than any barbell he'd ever lifted. 20 years of hiding had made his shoulders curve inward, his spine bend like a question mark. But as Rico stepped closer, something ancient stirred in Marcus's chest, a familiar fire he'd thought was permanently extinguished. "You deaf, old man?" Rico's voice carried the particular brand of menace that comes from having nothing left to lose. His crew spread out behind him like wolves, their eyes scanning for witnesses. The gym was empty except for them and the fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry wasps. Marcus kept his head down, gray beard hiding the scar across his jaw from when Tony the Tank Torino had caught him with an uppercut in '98. The same jaw Rico had inherited, though the boy would never know it. Same stubborn cleft, same way of grinding his teeth when angry. "I asked you a question." Rico's hand moved to his waistband, the outline of a pistol pressed against his hoodie. "My boys here think this place needs better security. You feel me?" The mop clattered to the concrete floor. Marcus's hands that had once been insured for $500,000, slowly rose to his sides. But they weren't surrendering. They were remembering. Protection money. Marcus's voice came out as a whisper, roughened by 2 decades of Marlboro Reds and silence. "That what this is?" Rico smiled, gold teeth catching the harsh light. He had Maria's smile, the same one that had made Marcus forget his own name back when he was somebody. Back when teenage girls screamed his name and supplement companies wrote 7-figure checks. "Smart man. See, my crew and we've been watching this place. A lot of expensive equipment. Be a shame if something happened to it." Rico pulled out his phone, started recording. "You the owner?" "Just the janitor." "Janitor." Rico spat the word like it tasted bitter. "Look at you, man. Pathetic. When I was a kid, my mom used to tell me about this bodybuilder. Said he was the strongest man alive. Said he was my—" Rico stopped himself, shook his head. "Point is, that dude had balls. Had respect. Not like you sweeping floors like some nobody." The irony hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. His son was comparing him to himself, not knowing they were the same person, not knowing the strongest man alive was standing right there, holding a mop instead of a trophy. "Your mother tell you anything else about him?" The question slipped out before Marcus could stop it. Rico's eyes narrowed. "Why you asking?" "Because I loved her. Because I had a choice between keeping my titles and keeping my family, and I chose wrong. Because every needle I put in my arm was another nail in the coffin of everything that mattered. Just curious." Marcus bent to pick up the mop, buying time. His reflection caught in the mirror that lined the far wall, the same mirror where he used to practice his poses, back when his body was a temple instead of a mausoleum. Now he looked like a ghost haunting his own crime scene. "Curiosity's gonna get you hurt, old man." Rico stepped forward, close enough that Marcus could smell the weed on his clothes, see the angry red scar across his knuckles. Maria's letter had mentioned that scar. A knife fight when Rico was 15, defending some girl's honor, just like his father would have done at that age. "You got 30 seconds to tell me where the owner keeps his money, or my boy Diesel here is going to redecorate this place. And we'll start with your face." Diesel stepped forward, crack pipe burns visible on his fingers, eyes like broken glass. He'd probably kill Rico himself for $20 and a hit. The kid had no idea how dangerous his own crew was. Something snapped inside Marcus. Not broke. snapped back into place, like a dislocated shoulder finally finding its socket. "The owner's not here," Marcus said, straightening his spine one vertebra at a time. His reflection grew larger in the mirror. "But I can speak for him." "Yeah? What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus dropped the mop again. This time it didn't clatter. It landed with the soft thud of something that would never be picked up again. "Means I'm done hiding." The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. 20 years of slouching disappeared. His shoulders rolled back, his chest expanded. The gray beard couldn't hide the way his jaw set like granite. For the first time since walking into the gym, Rico took a step backward. "You boys picked the wrong place," Marcus said, and his voice carried the authority of a man who'd once commanded arenas full of screaming fans. "And definitely the wrong janitor." The fluorescent lights hummed louder. Outside, Venice Beach continued its eternal dance of dreams and disasters, unaware that inside Gold's gym, a legend was about to remind his own son what real strength looked like. The air in Gold's gym held 20 years of sweat and dreams, thick enough to taste. Marcus could feel every molecule of it pressing against his skin as he stood there, fully upright for the first time in decades. The transformation rippling through his body was physical, yes, but it went deeper than muscle memory. It was archaeological. Each vertebra that straightened excavated another layer of who he used to be. Rico's crew sensed the shift before their leader did. Diesel's cracked-out eyes darted toward the exit. The two younger ones, barely out of high school, probably here for the thrill more than the money, shuffled backward until their shoulders hit the wall. Only Rico held his ground, but Marcus could see the confusion flickering across his son's face like shadows from a dying bulb. "What you think you gonna do, old man?" Rico's voice had lost its edge. The question came out more curious than threatening, as if he was genuinely puzzled by this metamorphosis happening in front of him. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was too busy remembering what it felt like to inhabit his own skin. The sensation was disorienting, like putting on a coat you'd forgotten you owned, only to discover it still fit perfectly. His hands, scarred and weathered from 2 decades of manual labor, slowly curled into fists. The knuckles cracked with satisfying pops that echoed off the concrete walls. This gym had been his sanctuary for 3 years now, not Gold's original location where he'd trained in his prime. That temple had been torn down and replaced by condos, but this smaller, grittier version that carried the same name like a faded tattoo. The owner, Jimmy Castellanos, had hired him without asking questions. Jimmy remembered the old days, remembered what the sport used to mean before it became all contracts and corporations. He'd given Marcus the night shift, let him clean in solitude, while the ghosts of his former life whispered from every corner. The weight room still smelled like iron and determination. The mirrors still reflected truth, even when you didn't want to see it. And the photographs lining the walls, champions from every era, still watched over the faithful with knowing eyes. Marcus had studied those photos every night for 3 years, but carefully avoided the section where his own images used to hang. Jimmy had taken them down without being asked, understanding that some wounds needed darkness to heal. But healing and forgetting weren't the same thing. "You know what your problem is?" Marcus said, his voice gaining strength with each word. He took a step forward, and Rico actually flinched. "You think strength comes from fear, from making people smaller than you are." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like electronic insects, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look haunted. Through the windows, Venice Beach sprawled in all its contradictory glory. Millionaire tech bros jogging past homeless encampments, street artists creating beauty next to dealers peddling destruction. This whole neighborhood was built on the premise that reinvention was possible, that anyone could shed their skin and become someone new. Marcus had believed that once. He'd come here as a 19-year-old kid from Bakersfield with nothing but raw ambition and a body that responded to iron like a tuning fork responds to sound. He'd built himself into a god, literally sculpting his flesh into something that defied human limitations. For 15 years, he'd been untouchable. Then, the scandal broke. The photos had been devastating. Marcus injecting himself in a Gold's bathroom, syringes scattered across a sink like medical confetti. But worse than the images was the interview that followed. Some bitter ex-training partner selling out every secret, every shortcut, every compromise Marcus had made to stay on top. The sport that had made him destroyed him with surgical precision, stripping away his titles, his endorsements, his identity. Maria had left 3 weeks later, taking 5-year-old Rico with her. She'd stood in their Malibu kitchen, the one with windows overlooking the Pacific, and told him she couldn't watch him kill himself anymore. Couldn't let their son grow up thinking that kind of self-destruction was strength. "You choose," she'd said, holding Rico's tiny hand. "Choose us or choose the needles. But you can't have both." He'd chosen wrong. God help him, he'd chosen wrong. "I know men like you," Marcus continued, circling Rico now like a predator. Each step was deliberate, calculated to project power without aggression. It was a skill he'd learned from studying big cats at the LA Zoo during his competition days, how apex predators moved through space, claiming territory with pure presence. Men who mistake violence for power, who think breaking things makes them strong. Rico's hand moved toward his waistband again, but slower this time, uncertain. "You want to know what real strength looks like?" Marcus asked. He stopped circling, planted his feet shoulder-width apart. The stance felt like coming home. Real strength protects things, builds them up instead of tearing them down. In the mirror behind Rico, Marcus caught sight of his reflection. For a moment, just a moment, he looked like himself again. The recognition hit Rico like a physical blow. Marcus watched his son's face change, confusion melting into disbelief, then hardening into something darker. Rico's phone was still recording, its red light blinking like a mechanical heartbeat, capturing the moment 20 years of carefully constructed anonymity crumbled to dust. "No." The word came out as a whisper. Rico's gun hand trembled. "No fucking way." But Marcus could see it happening, the mental puzzle pieces clicking into place, the jawline that no beard could disguise, the way Marcus moved, deliberate and predatory. The voice that, once unleashed, carried the unmistakable authority of a man who'd commanded stages and conquered worlds. Marcus "Tank" Sullivan. Rico's crew looked confused by the name, but Rico said it like a curse, like something that had been burning his tongue for years, waiting to be spit out. The Marcus Sullivan, Mr. Fucking Universe himself. The phone slipped from Rico's fingers, clattering across the concrete floor. Its screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern, but the camera kept rolling, recording their fractured reflections. "That's why you knew about my mom." Rico's voice was climbing, hysteria creeping in around the edges. "You didn't just noof her, you knew her. Jesus Christ, you knew her." Diesel and the others were backing toward the exit now, sensing something they couldn't understand but didn't want to be part of. Whatever this was, it had moved beyond simple extortion into something personal and dangerous. Marcus felt the last of his defenses collapse. 20 years of hiding, of bending his shoulders and dulling his voice, of becoming nobody, all of it stripped away by his son's recognition. He was naked under these fluorescent lights, exposed in ways that went deeper than skin. Rico pulled the gun, pointed it with shaking hands. "Don't you fucking say my name. You don't get to say my name." The barrel was steady enough. Even trembling, Rico had good form, two-handed grip, proper stance. Someone had taught him to shoot and taught him well. Probably one of the same men who'd taught him to rob and threaten and survive on streets that Marcus had never had to walk. "You know who I thought you were?" Rico's voice cracked. "My whole life, I thought you were some kind of hero, some unstoppable god who just disappeared. Mom showed me pictures, told me stories about how strong you were, how you could lift cars and bend steel bars and how nothing could hurt you." Marcus's chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Maria had told their son stories. Even after everything, the scandal, the abandonment, the years of silence, she'd made him into a legend in their boy's imagination. "She said you were coming back." Rico's finger found the trigger. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I asked where my daddy was, she said you were fighting demons but you'd come back." That Tank Sullivan never quit. That Tank Sullivan would never abandon his family. The mirror behind Rico reflected both their faces now. Father and son, separated by 23 years in a gulf of pain that seemed unbridgeable. Marcus could see himself in Rico's features, but also Maria's fire, her unwillingness to accept defeat. Their boy had inherited the worst of both parents. Marcus's capacity for self-destruction, and Maria's inability to forgive. I used to practice your poses in my bedroom, Rico continued, tears streaming down his cheeks now. Used to flex in the mirror and pretend I was you. Used to tell kids at school my dad was Tank Sullivan and they'd call me a liar because Tank Sullivan wouldn't have a son living in East LA with his mom working 2 jobs just to pay rent. Each word was a dagger. Marcus felt them sliding between his ribs, finding spaces in his armor he'd forgotten existed. But they were right, weren't they? Rico wiped his nose with his free hand, the gun never wavering. Tank Sullivan wouldn't have a son like me. Tank Sullivan's son would live in Malibu and go to private school and have everything he needed. Tank Sullivan's son wouldn't be robbing gyms for drug money. The admission hung in the air like smoke, robbing gyms for drug money. Marcus's worst nightmare made flesh, his son walking the same self-destructive path, just with different substances. When did you know? Marcus asked quietly. When did you figure out who I was? Rico's laugh was bitter as poison. 3 months ago. Saw you here cleaning windows. Recognized the walk first, then the shoulders. Took me weeks to work up the courage to come back. 3 months. His son had been watching him for 3 months, planning this confrontation. This wasn't random violence, it was an execution 20 years in the making. So what now? Marcus spread his arms wide, surrendering to whatever came next. You gonna shoot your old man? Put Tank Sullivan out of his misery? Rico's grip tightened on the gun, and Marcus realized he genuinely didn't know the answer. The gun trembled between them like a bridge neither could cross. Marcus watched his son's face cycle through emotions, rage, grief, confusion, each one a mirror of his own internal chaos. The fluorescent lights hummed their electronic dirge while sweat beaded on Rico's forehead, mixing with tears he refused to acknowledge. I don't know, Rico whispered, and the honesty in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. I used to dream about this moment, about finding you and making you pay for what you did to us, but now, he shook his head, the gun wavering. Now I just feel empty. Marcus wanted to step forward to bridge the 20-year chasm between them, but something in Rico's eyes warned him off. This wasn't the time for sudden movements or fatherly gestures. This was a crime scene waiting to happen, and any wrong word could pull the trigger. Your crew's gone, Marcus said instead, nodding toward the empty doorway where Diesel and the others had vanished. Smart boys. They know when something's bigger than they can handle. Rico didn't look back to confirm. His eyes stayed locked on his father's face, searching for something. Absolution, explanation, maybe just proof that this wasn't another nightmare. They were never my crew anyway, Rico said. Just people who needed me for jobs. Nobody gives a shit about Rico Vasquez. I'm just another street kid with quick hands and no future. His voice dropped. But I thought maybe if Tank Sullivan's son called, people might listen. The name hit Marcus like a slap. Vasquez. Maria's maiden name. Of course she'd gone back to it after the divorce, erased every trace of the Sullivan legacy that had brought them nothing but pain. Their son didn't even carry his father's name. She never told you. What? That you existed? Rico's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. She told me plenty. Told me how you lifted trucks for fun, how you could eat a dozen eggs for breakfast and bench press a small car, how you were this fucking superhero who saved people and signed autographs and lived in magazines. Marcus felt his stomach twist, the mythology of his old life, distorted through the lens of a child's imagination and a mother's protective lies. Maria had made him into something he'd never been, a hero instead of a cautionary tale. She didn't tell me about the needles, Rico continued. Didn't mention that you chose drugs over family. Had to learn that from Wikipedia when I was 16. Real nice, finding out your dad's a junkie from the fucking internet. The word junkie hit harder than any physical blow Marcus had ever taken, because it was true. Whatever else he'd been, champion, legend, god among mortals, he'd also been a man so desperate to maintain his edge that he'd poisoned his own blood and called it dedication. The steroids weren't, Marcus started, then stopped. What was the point of explaining? That they were different from street drugs? That they were for performance, not escape? Rico was 25 years old, robbing gyms with crackheads. He knew the difference between medicine and addiction, and he knew which side of the line his father had fallen on. Weren't what? weren't that bad? Rico's grip tightened on the gun. You chose chemicals over your family. You picked being huge and famous over being my dad. Don't stand there and tell me it wasn't that fucking bad. The mirrors surrounding them reflected their confrontation in infinite regression. Father and son, repeated endlessly in silver glass, each reflection a little more distorted than the last. Marcus could see himself from every angle, and in every one he looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd run out of places to hide. You want to know the worst part? Rico's voice cracked again. I was proud of you anyway, even after I knew the truth. Used to tell myself that at least my father was somebody. At least Tank Sullivan mattered, even if he was gone. The admission hung between them like a confession. Pride and shame, tangled together in ways that neither of them knew how to untangle. But look at you now, Rico whispered. Look what you became, a janitor, a nobody. You threw away everything, your career, your family, your fucking life, and for what? To mop floors in the same gym where you used to be a king? Marcus had no answer. What could he say? That he'd been trying to disappear? That becoming nobody was the only way he'd found to live with what he'd done? That every night spent cleaning these floors was penance for the man he used to be? The gun barrel hadn't moved, still pointed at the center of Marcus's chest. But something in Rico's eyes had shifted. The rage was still there, but underneath it was something more dangerous. Disappointment so profound it looked like grief. What now? Rico echoed his father's earlier question. What happens when Tank Sullivan's son meets his hero and finds out he's just another broken-down old man?